An estimated 400 to 500 UK fighters are in Syria and Iraq with ISIS. It is also believed that up to 250 have returned to Britain. How concerned should we be that these young men will return home and launch an attack?
We should be very concerned, Issa. They have told us that they intend to do exactly that. In fact, they posted pictures of themselves on social media posing with homemade bombs, threatening us. And Britain, as you've correctly said, has about 500 foreign fighters who travelled to the region. Now, let's put that into context. That's 1 in every 800 Muslim Sunni British male of fighting age. That's a huge proportion of this country's Muslim population who have succumbed to this level of violence. And those fighters don't emerge from a vacuum. They don't just spring up from nothing. There must be some form of residual atmosphere that's prevalent within our communities here that somehow incubates that type of mindset. So it's definitely very worrying for us. There are roughly 3,000 from across Europe, and of course we can travel throughout Europe without the need for a visa. So that means any country could succumb to these sorts of attacks as soon as these fighters return home.
I read a piece that you wrote for the British daily The Times, in which you say, and I'm quoting, Islamist extremism is poisoning our community relations, hijacking our youth, and we are doing very little to address it. We're woefully, your words, unprepared for when our terrorists come home. Can you explain what you mean by this?
Yes, that piece is in today's Times, and you know, I've been saying this for a long time. We don't have yet, so many years after the 7/7 London bombing attacks or after 9/11, we are yet to have a unified, centrally coordinated countering extremism strategy that works within communities to prevent young people from joining these extremist groups. Now, I'm not talking about the hard-end counter-terrorism on an operational level. That's quite effective. You know, we've deterred attacks on home soil quite successfully since those bad old days of domestic terrorism. What I'm talking about is stemming the flow of extremism that attracts these young people to join the groups in the first place. We're not working with communities on the ground. We need to involve Muslims. Muslims should be at the forefront of this so that there's no backlash against the communities. But also, we need to be working online to start promoting counter-narratives because ISIS are so effective through their social media campaigns in attracting these people, and we have absolutely no voice online challenging their ideology head-on.
Well, I want to tap into your experience there, because by your own admission, you're a former extremist, now the chairman of a British counter-terrorism think tank. From your experience, what is drawing these young men from the UK and other Western countries to take part in brutal violence as part of the militant ISIS movement?
The starting point is that they're already growing up in what I call monocultural ghettos. The 90s policy in this country was to allow for a level of multiculturalism. It didn't succeed. Putting aside the term, what ended up happening was that communities started growing together apart. And so already they're growing up in a relative isolation from mainstream society. And then into that isolation come extremist organizations that propagate some serious ideological dogma. And then a level of groupthink emerges. They grow up within this isolated context, and their values and their understanding of the world becomes totally distorted. A foreign policy grievance narrative emerges. They start looking at themselves as victims, and on a wider level, they start looking at Muslim communities across the world as victims, and they convince themselves that they are somehow holy warriors whose job it is, whose role in life it is, to defend Muslims from oppression all across the world. And of course, what happens is they become the monster they think they're trying to fight. We've got to start stemming the propaganda, the spread of this Islamist ideological dogma that has so captured the minds of young, angry European Muslims. It's a serious problem, and as I said, we're woefully unprepared to address it.
You have to stem the dogma. The Prime Minister David Cameron said it has to defeat a warped and barbaric movement before UK citizens become the target of attacks. What's your advice to Prime Minister Cameron? What needs to be done?
I'd say to the Prime Minister, we need a central ombudsman that's responsible for coordinating this strategy across all government departments, accountable to Downing Street alone, to make sure that all the ministers and the secretaries of state are working towards the same strategy. We need to start working on the ground, on the grassroots, and online to start fighting back against this ideological dogma. And we need to make sure that we're not scared, apologies, we need to make sure we're not scared of appearing racist or somehow culturally insensitive for challenging head-on this worldview. It's not racist, it's not culturally insensitive. Muslims should be at the front line of this, defending their own religion and their own communities, because they are the first victims of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other forms of extremism. They're the ones who are attacked first and foremost. We saw ISIS blowing up mosques in Iraq. but we need to start addressing this challenge head on. Enough of making excuses and sidestepping and burying our heads in the sand.